Another day is here, and you're ready for it. What to wear? Check. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Check. Planning for what's next and how to save for it? That's where Bank of America can help. For your financial to-dos, Bank of America has experts ready to help get you closer to your goals. Get started at one of our local financial centers or 24/7 in our mobile banking app. Find a location near you at bankofamerica.com/talktous. What would you like the power to do? Mobile banking requires downloading the app and is only available for select devices. Message and data rates may apply. Bank of America N.A., member FDIC.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Salah. Escape Cancelo. Oh, it's brilliant from Mo Salah. And still, Salah. That is sensational. Salah is it? What a strike. Yuri Tielemans. I mean, not then. That is what you know, always not so good.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, EPL Index proudly brings to you the best prediction podcast in the world, as Tad Predictable. Your host, Tadiwa Chankira.
And we're back. Welcome to another episode of A Tad Predictable, the post-season edition. Took a little bit of a hiatus, an intentional one, because there was a few things that needed to be sorted out when it came to the Premier League. Obviously, the PSR rules were coming into play thick and fast towards the end of June, obviously with the new financial year kicking in for most of the clubs. And then also there was a few there were rumors at the time of deals that were going to happen, that were going to have implications on the podcast that we're going to be going into over this next wave of Premier League teams that we're going to be looking at. And we didn't want to sort of date ourselves too much with these podcasts by continuing streaming ahead and then some of that news crystallizing or becoming, more solidified in the transfer window. So we held back a little bit. Let a few of the things play out, let a few of the scenarios play out, and then we can come back and continue our series that we're doing at the moment, where we are looking at all of the Premier League teams that are going to be in the Premier League this season, looking at what they achieved last season or failed to achieve last season, what they're hoping to achieve next season, and then obviously bridging that gap between the two, what they need to do in this summer transfer window in order to achieve those goals for next season. Sort of like a Cliff Notes for the 24-25 season, if you want to sort of just ease into the Premier League teams, get an idea of what each team is like. Obviously, the team you support will be facing each and every one of these teams. So it's always good, I think, to have at least an idea of what everyone's doing in and around the league. And obviously today our focus is on Everton Football Club, and one of those clubs, as I was saying, that was heavily involved in the scandal that is PSR at the moment, and then also a few transfers that were transfers in, transfers out with regards to business they're trying to do, they have done, and they are almost about to do when it comes to a specific player that we will get to in due course. But from our perspective, I think, obviously me being a Liverpool fan, there might be hesitation of, what can he offer looking at an Everton team. But as is tradition with this podcast, we make sure we do our work behind the scenes. We are objective where there needs to be an element of being objective, and then sometimes the Liverpool fan in me creeps in. But I will say I'm probably one of the few Liverpool fans that doesn't like the demise of Everton. And I say that with a caveat in that I always preach it this way. I don't mind how well Everton do. In fact, I wouldn't mind Everton finishing as high as they possibly can or going as far as they possibly can in any club competition, as long as it's one position less than what Liverpool have achieved. So if Everton want to make Champions League every single season, or finish second in the Premier League every single season, but Liverpool finish first, then I have no issue with Everton. It's almost like that little brother or little sister who isn't really a threat in that sense on the sports field, where you always see them as sort of the little sibling that you've been able to dominate on the sports field for years on end growing up. That's kind of how I feel about Everton and the relationship that they have with Liverpool. I don't see them as a big threat to Liverpool, and obviously this is probably me being quite patronizing to them, but that's just the reality of the situation. And I get it, some Liverpool fans, they love to see the demise of Everton. They want to see Everton get relegated from the Premier League, for example. For me, I think it's good for the city of Liverpool for Everton to continue being in the Premier League. And as I said, as long as they finish one position below Liverpool in the league, or they lose the final to Liverpool in the competitions, I'm perfectly fine for Everton to thrive, just with the caveat of not thriving better than Liverpool do. So that, let's put that to one side. So at least I have a part of me that would root for an Everton from that perspective. So I think I can be objective. They've had big transfer talk this season, obviously centered around a rejuvenated Man United, if we can call it that, or at least a refocused Man United. I was actually with a Man United fan earlier today that seemed rather optimistic about what Man United could do going forward under their new ownership. But obviously that relationship with Everton, and trying to take Everton's good players, it goes all the way back to Wayne Rooney and maybe even before that if you want to check the history books. But it seems like Everton are willing to stand their ground when it comes to Branthwaite, and we will obviously get to him. But before we sort of fast forward to the business side of things from a transfer perspective, let's scale it back a little bit. Have a look at what Everton did last season, and then obviously seeing what it is they want to achieve next season, and what's all going to happen in between is what this podcast is all about. But in terms of what they did last season, I think they were doing relatively well, in my opinion. Sort of first couple of games of the season, obviously they had a few defeats, some of them unlucky. Look at that Fulham loss to open at the opening of the season. There was that Wolverhampton loss as well. It seemed like they were struggling at Goodison Park. They then had to face Arsenal, which is never easy, and then obviously the 2-1 loss to Luton was also a bit of a shock. So it was a very, very shaky start for them, but away from home, I thought they were doing relatively well, and that's sort of where they were starting to pick up their form. And towards December time, they went on a bit of a run. I think it was 4 games on the bounce, if I'm not mistaken, in the month of December before they got stopped by Tottenham, where they went on a winning streak. And it seemed like they were turning their season around. And then, obviously, the big elephant in the room, PSR rears its head again. When it comes to Everton, we know that they got the points deductions. They appealed the points deductions, but at the end of the day, they got punished for breaching the financial rules that they are governed by. And look, from that perspective, in terms of was their points deduction justified? We ran a poll around that time on Cheap Like on the social media app formerly known as Twitter, on A Tad Predictable on Twitter. We ran a poll, and majority of the people were saying that the points deduction was justified. From my perspective, I wondered if it was harsh enough to be a deterrent for future, for fear of future reprimand from different clubs around the league. And I guess maybe it was, because we saw teams starting to, be a bit more cautious towards the January window, and then certainly at the beginning of this June to wherever August, September transfer window, we've seen teams be a bit more cautious. But now the new financial year, maybe, they've gotten their ducks in a row. A lot of the clubs were scrambling towards the end of June, but it seems like now business can continue, and hopefully no one gets dinged with PSR breaches heading into next season. So, yeah, I think this season almost got derailed a bit by those points deductions. Just the drama surrounding it all couldn't have been easy to handle from inside Everton's walls. Obviously, everyone was piling on them, and they had the eye of football on them for quite a period of time. So it couldn't have been easy on the players to perform and concentrate on performing on the pitch. But the important thing for Everton, the moment they got those points deductions, whether there's an appeal or not, the moment that happened, the goal was now making sure they did not get relegated. You always fear that you can, a club like Everton that's been a stalwart in the Premier League could end up doing something that Leeds did, where it was almost impossible for Leeds to go down, and then they went down, and it took them a good while before they could come back to the Premier League. And even then, Leeds are still not established as a Premier League team, and we saw last season they failed to come back up to the Premier League. So that would have been the worry for Everton, is what would be the ramifications of relegation. Thankfully for them, this season was another season where they don't have to worry about, and hopefully for their fans' sake, that's the last of that in terms of being involved in the relegation battle and looking to sort of rejuvenate and put Everton back on the map in terms of being one of those very, very interesting grounds to go play against. Where you're going to get a good game. You're going to have to put in a shift if you want to get a result against them. But 15th in the Premier League. So all in all, in the end, when you're looking at the 15th place, it's not bad in terms of, we're safe. In terms of the FA Cup now, they started in the third round. They got knocked out in the fourth round. I mean, from their perspective, they probably were now just focusing on staying in the Premier League. They lost again to Luton. Obviously, they had lost to Luton earlier in the season, but again at Goodison Park, they lost 2-1, same scoreline to Luton in the FA Cup. And then in the Carabao Cup, they reached the quarterfinals, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the quarterfinals, lost to Fulham on penalties there. So not so great in the cup competitions, but I think the focus was staying in the Premier League, and the fact that they achieved that, I don't think it's too much of an issue that they didn't do too well in the cups. And I'm always one of those that establish yourselves in the league, get to a comfortable position, and then you can start looking at how far can we go in the cups. At the moment, I think Everton just need to re-establish themselves in the pecking order in the Premier League. A top half team that can creep into those European spots if one of the teams above them struggles. That should be the aim for Everton over the next couple of years. If they can aim to achieve that over the next couple of years, I think it will be a huge, huge success. Then you can start going for the cup competitions and focusing on what damage you can do there. Relief is probably the big thing for a lot of people involved with Everton in terms of staying in the Premier League last season, and then now this season starting afresh. They would have been heading into this season with a little bit more optimism if the takeover had taken place. By now they were expecting Fred King Group to have at least declared publicly that they are going to be taking over the club. But a couple of days ago, it was revealed that they've pulled out of a potential takeover deal for Everton. Now, again, I put a caveat because we know when they took over at Roma, they did the same thing. They pulled out. Maybe it was a negotiation tactic. Maybe it was showing, willingness to walk away. And then they came back and they took over at Roma. So maybe they're doing something similar here at Everton. We know the 777 debt and financial situations that are going on there with Mashiri and them. I think that's maybe one of the sticking points, is what the speculation is, we don't know what the exact figure is. At least I don't have the exact figure in front of me. And if there is an exact figure, I'm sure it will be given to me in my ear. But at the moment, I don't think there is a public solidified figure. There's an assumption that there's around 200 million in money that Friedkin don't want to be involved with. It's just a messy situation. There's legal battles happening with regards to the 777, involvement with Everton. And Mashiri, I think, is going to have to, at some point in time, maybe just either smooth things over and take the debt on, or, I don't know, try and figure out a way in which the deal can be brokered with Friedkin in order for them to take over from Everton, because it did seem like they were ready and willing and able to be the front runners and lead the club into a more stable situation, a stable tenure over the next couple of years. Obviously, there's the stadium that is being built, beautiful stadium that they're building at the moment, and you obviously want them to be showcasing that stadium in the Premier League, in European football, and beyond, if they can achieve that. So yeah, still some uncertainty with regards to the takeover. They were hoping that would have been sorted. Now, the club was very quick to mention that none of the transfer activity is going to be, messed about by the fact that the takeover hasn't happened. It's business as usual from that perspective. Sean Dyche will be backed and will have the resources to go and invest in a squad so that they are able to go into next season with that rejuvenated side, heading into the last season, an emotional season at Goodison Park. I'm sure they will want to send Goodison Park off in a positive way, and then obviously head to their new stadium in a positive way. As I like to say, you want to leave a place the way you enter a new place, and vice versa, enter a new place in a good way that you've left the other place. So they want to leave Goodison Park with good, fond memories in their last season. Hopefully that then bodes well for them heading into their new stadium. But yeah, so considering that business as usual from the transfer perspective, let's take a look at what it is that they have done so far. That's going to involve some contract situations that I do want to go into, and then obviously we'll look at the overall transfer policy and what it is that they're trying to do this season. But yeah, from my perspective, the biggest talking point for Everton at the moment seems to be sales. We know Onana was sort of, hinting at the fact that he did want to leave. He did want to go play at another club. We know that the Man United interest in Branthwaite was very public. It's almost like they were trying to negotiate the deal in public and try and get Everton to cave to their will. And then obviously there's Calvert-Lewin as well. That's just bubbling over. And in the recent days, Beto as well has come up as another one that could potentially be leaving. I don't think we're going to talk too much on the Mykolenko potentially leaving, because it seems like that's going to take quite a bit of money to pry him out of Everton. So especially now with, spoiler alert, the Onana money that's potentially coming in, there's not really that need to go and sell Mykolenko if that was the situation where, a Napoli, for example, who have been rumored to be interested in him. I think Mykolenko will be an Everton player next season. But yeah, so a few big changes that could shape and reshape what Sean Dyche will be looking to do with Everton. I think in terms of formation and how they're looking to set up, I think it's quite a structured, I'm going to call it a 4-4-1-1. with that sort of supporting striker behind the main striker up front. It can become a 4-2-3-1 when they're being more adventurous and the wingers are pushing up a bit further forward. But yeah, I think it's more of a 4-4-1-1 in terms of structure and what they're looking to do there. So obviously there's some holes that they'll need to be filling there. There's some depth that they definitely need to fill, in my opinion. And that would be the focus that we're going to have in terms of how we build them out. Let's look at these outgoings, because that will obviously help dictate what Everton can do in the transfer market. Now, I mentioned the fact that the takeover has stalled.
You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members only pay a $25 copay or less. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Yes, I know the club is saying that, transfer business is business as usual, but what does that then mean for in terms of a budget? What can the manager expect to be able to spend? I'm assuming that it's largely going to be whatever you can raise from player sales, and maybe some of that is going to have to be held back because we know, for example, the stadium, the new stadium, they're going to have to pay that off over the next couple of years. We've seen the impact that's had on an Arsenal, back in the Wenger era. We've seen the impact that's had on Tottenham, for example, and maybe they're still feeling some of that now. So yeah, that there's always that trepidation of, yes, it's a beautiful new stadium. It's absolutely fantastic. It's going to be one of the better grounds to go to in the Premier League, certainly from a fan experience perspective. So that's the benefit of it. Obviously, the commercial revenue that they'll be looking to generate from that, not just from a football perspective, but, from just a hosting perspective, naming rights perspective. There's a lot of avenues that they can explore with the new stadium, but there is also the fact that it needs to be paid off. And sometimes clubs aren't then willing to back, the on-field side of things as strongly as they would have if they hadn't got that debt to pay off with the new stadium. So we'll see how that plays out. Again, without the owners being certain, you never really know how the new owners are going to feel about that if it ends up not being the owners that they were expecting them to be. So with that in mind, I think the focus will be on just using sort of the money that is coming in, or at least some of the money that is coming in, and looking at that, Everton, they've done some business already. Some people are saying that some of the business they did was in anticipation of, for example, Onana leaving. I don't think the business that they've done had much to do with potentially Branthwaite leaving, because obviously they've not really brought anyone in that would come in as a direct replacement for him, or anyway even close to that. In fact, they've even gotten rid of another centre-back in Ben Godfrey. So that would be a position area that they'll need to then reinvest any Branthwaite money that does come in. But yeah, in terms of business that they've already done, Ndia has come in from Marseille. I think he's going to probably play that supporting role behind the main striker. That then gives them the option of dropping Decore a bit deeper. I'm assuming that was taking care of the Onana being, shipped to Aston Villa. Obviously, it's not official, but it seems more than likely that that's going to happen. So that Onana ends up at Aston Villa. The fee being talked about is around the 50 million mark. So that's really good business, in my opinion, for Everton. I think he's probably worth a lot more than that in this market, in this era of football. But 50 million in the bank for Everton does them a lot better than 70, 80 million on the bench, because he hasn't been, a guaranteed starter for them. So I think it's worth selling him. I don't think it's worth, fighting to keep him. You send him off with well wishes, and then the key thing is reinvesting that money really, really well. But as I said, what they look to have done, bringing in Dia, he'll play as the supporting striker. You can drop Doucouré deeper into, that midfield. Maybe that's what helps with the depth in midfield, which we'll get to a bit later. They've also brought in Irogbenam from Aston Villa. Part of, there was the Lewis Dobbin. He's gone to Aston Villa for it was undisclosed, but I'm assuming a similar price to what Tim has come in on. I think he's still too young to be counted as someone that's going to make a huge impact next season, but it's definitely a development player that could, over the course of the next couple of seasons, become a key player for them. And I like him coming to Everton. I think it was a neat position in midfield to kind of add a bit more depth there, and I'm thinking long-term depth. We know, obviously, Doucouré is not getting any younger. We know Gay is not getting any younger. So you want to be replacing those players with players coming through. Obviously, they lost the likes of Gomez as well. There's the uncertainty with Dele Alli and whether or not he's going to be a mainstay there at Everton, and we'll get to him in a little bit. So yeah, I like the move. Obviously, the pretty much swap deal that they've done for Lewis Dobbin, maybe some fans might have wanted to keep him and be able to bring Tim in as well, but it seemed like a deal that both clubs were happy to do. Yeah, Neil Maupay ends up coming back from Brentford. By all indications, Brentford aren't going to be bringing him back permanently. They had the option. They've mentioned publicly that they at the moment they're not pursuing bringing him back, but it's not something that they've closed the door on. So that's one to keep an eye on, to see whether or not Maupay does end up going back to Brentford. They seemed very happy with him last season and the contribution that he made to the team overall. So those are the players that have come in inverted commas. Players that have gone out, I mentioned Ben Godfrey. He's gone to Atlanta for 12 million euros. I've mentioned Dobbin. He's gone out. And then some of the other players, like Lonergan, who was formerly at Liverpool. He then was at Everton, obviously sort of like the third, fourth choice goalkeeper / part of probably the coaching staff there. He's gone to Wigan on a free transfer. Then Andre Gomez, he's still not with the club. Dele Alli, that I've mentioned. In terms of Dele Alli, he's still in and around with Everton. It seems like negotiations took place with Tottenham over the summer period of basically the clauses that were in the contract were that if Dele Alli ends up staying with Everton, then it would have triggered some payment structures that they would have had to make for Dele Alli to Tottenham. But because they've been able to negotiate it, it seems like Everton now have first refusal on Dele Alli. Whether or not he becomes a permanent signing for them, I think that's still something that they're debating. But what Everton didn't want to do was put all the work in that they've put in him over the last couple of windows, and I guess over the last couple of months, and then another club just comes in and pips them for him. They wanted to protect themselves, give themselves that window to get him permanently as their player if they wanted to. Obviously, he's training with them. I don't know if he's been involved with the sort of the main drills and stuff like that yet, but he's out on the grass. He is training with them, and he's looking like a player that Sean Dyche really loves having around. So hopefully for his sake, hopefully for Everton's sake, he can rejuvenate his career and become a mainstay at Everton. And I think that would be a lovely story. And Everton are one of those good clubs from that perspective, where they could have easily just, shook hands, let him go and continue. But they've been there with him through a very difficult time in his life. And I really appreciate the human nature of Everton. That's always in and around, especially as a Liverpool fan. We know, yes, there's the ribbing, there's the joking around with Everton because they're, local rival. But when it comes to the city of Liverpool needing to come together, putting football to one side, Everton are always there first, and willing to give a helping hand. So I'm not surprised with the really commendable way that they've handled the Dele Alli situation, in my perspective. Danjuma's gone back to Villarreal. I think, obviously, back in December, probably, it was clear that he wasn't going to have too much involvement with Everton going on from a long-term perspective. So, yeah, that kind of leaves them with a few holes, in my opinion. I'm going to mention Jack Harrison. He went back and then he got loaned back to Everton. But he's an interesting situation because Everton know they've got that rule that they need to take care of in the Premier League, or keep an eye on, where they can only loan into players from the division, so or from England. So they are obviously wondering if maybe they make Jack Harrison a permanent deal instead of the loan deal that they have. So that's negotiations are taking place to see, can they make that a permanent deal, and it opens up another loan space for them to utilize if they do need it later down the road. So he comes back. As I said, he was on loan with them last season. Everything seemed to point to him heading back to Everton the moment Leeds did not get promoted back to the Premier League. So he comes back. I think that helps them in their wide areas. That's probably their biggest area of need at the moment, is their wide areas. They certainly are showing that in public with the amount of wide players that they're being linked to and that they are going for. That's an area of need that they're wanting to address. But before we dive into the details of those incomings, I've mentioned obviously the summary of where they are to date at the moment, but that summary also includes player contracts. And obviously Ashley Young signed a new 1-year contract, and it seemed by all accounts had the conversation with Sean Dyche. They came to the conclusion that Sean Dyche wanted him there. Young was more than happy to be a part of the project. He said it was a no-brainer, if I'm not mistaken, at the time, when it was announced that he extended his contract. So I think it's a smart signing. Obviously, he's 38 years 38 years old. So maybe there's concerns with age and how much he can give to the team. But considering I won't say financial situation in a horrendous way, but I don't think Everton have a lot of money to play with. Yes, they've got those sales that I mentioned, the Onana, 50 million, potentially a Calvert-Lewin sale that could happen there. Maybe a Mope sale if he's not going to be a mainstay in the team. And then if a Branthwaite goes, obviously that would open up more funds as well. But I don't think they can address every single need in this transfer window. So they've got Mykolenko there at left back. Having an Ashley Young around that can deputize as a backup if needed, I think is a smart play. It's a 1-year deal. He's not heavily burdening them from that perspective. I think it makes sense to just have him come back. He can be the backup left back. You just hope that Mykolenko stays fit the whole season, but he's definitely someone that can play really well. Branthwaite has played there at times. They obviously don't want that to be a main fixture, but they can break that glass in case of emergency if they need to. But obviously they want to keep that centre-back pairing of Branthwaite and Tarkowski where it is. But as I said, if they need it, he can go and play there and deputize there. So yeah, Ashley Young, that's the one. That's a smart signing in terms of extending his contract, in my opinion. And I think it's harmless in terms of he knows his squad role. He knows the job that he has to do there. I think it was a no-brainer. As Ashley Young has said himself, I do agree with him. I think it was a no-brainer for them to make sure that they kept him. In terms of other contract situations, Dominic Calvert-Lewin was offered a new contract. It seemed like initially he turned it down. they're obviously still trying to convince him to sign that extension. His contract runs out next season. Now, this goes to future long-term planning for Everton. They cannot afford for another situation like this to happen, where you've got an England-capped player. I think he's played 11 times for England, if I'm not mistaken, and got 4 goals. You can't have a player that's an England international running his contract out and leaving for free. That can't happen, especially when you've got, the financial restraints that Everton have had over the last couple of seasons. You've got to get that money in for these types of players. You just can't afford for that to happen, especially considering when they paid for Calvert-Lewin from Sheffield United. I think it was 1.8 million euros, if I'm not mistaken. So pretty much all of the money that would be coming in for him is going to be profit. You can't afford to let someone like that leave on a free transfer. So it's either he signs a new contract this window, or you have to sell him. And I think that's where a West Ham, Newcastle at one point in time were interested in him, but West Ham seemed to be the team most interested in him at the moment. It seems like West Ham probably looking between the 15 to 20 million. They know the 1 year, contract that he has. It puts Everton in an awkward position, because I don't think they have then the leg to stand on to hold out if you're going to end up losing him on a free transfer. In an ideal world, they would be able to renew his contract and then obviously say to him, look, if things don't turn around over the next year, we'll definitely let you leave, but we need to make sure that we retain your value. We can't be having you leave for free. And hopefully, from his perspective, Everton have stuck with him through a lot of injuries throughout his career. Hopefully, that would be a goodwill gesture from his perspective to say, look, I don't want you guys to miss out on the transfer fee as well. But you never know. Sometimes situations don't work out that way. They are professional athletes after all, and they have to look out for their careers as well. As everything else that's involved in these situations. So yeah, I think for Calvert-Lewin, it's a situation of either sell him now or he signs a new contract. They cannot go into next season where he doesn't have a new contract, because the risk of losing him for free would be detrimental to the club, in my opinion. But yeah, as I said, West Ham are probably the team at the moment that are really, really looking like they're going to make a run for him. Now, the awkward thing for them is Beto is also getting a lot of interest from clubs elsewhere. Now, can they sell both? Can they afford to let both go? I don't think so. I think it's one or the other. But again, the Calvert-Lewin contract situation kind of, takes it out of their hands somewhat. So it's probably a situation of Beto is not allowed to leave until the Calvert-Lewin situation is resolved, whichever way it's resolved. If it's resolved that Calvert-Lewin is the one being sold, I think they have to retain Beto. If Calvert-Lewin is able to agree a new contract, I think then they can let Beto go and look to bring in someone else to deputize for Calvert-Lewin. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting situation. By all accounts, Beto is doing really well in preseason. He seems to be scoring a lot of goals in preseason training, and they're quite optimistic about the form he's going to be entering the season next season. So I'm sure they do not want to lose him heading into next season. So yeah, that's one to keep an eye on. Another contract situation, in my opinion, is obviously the issue that comes with Jared Branthwaite. Now, fortunately, and obviously Everton did what I was talking about with Calvert-Lewin, warning about with Calvert-Lewin. They've prevented that situation with Branthwaite in that last year in October, he signed a brand new contract with them. It extended his deal with them until 2027. So they've got room to breathe there. It's not they have to sell him this window type of situation. And we've seen that. They've set the price. They've told Man United what the price is. Man United have tried coming with low balls. Everton haven't wavered. They've set the price. Come and pay it, or just leave us alone, really. And I think that's a good place to be. Very talented player. they know they can only sell him once unless there's a sell-on clause or something like that. So they want to make sure they get good value for money for him. And based on Man United's track record, based on the talent that people say that Branthwaite has and the potential that he has, I think the 70 million that they're asking for isn't unreasonable. I get why Everton are asking for that. I also get why Man United are not wanting to pay that, because they're trying to reset the perception with them that they just overpay for players, irrespective of whether or not the value is there. They just pay whatever the asking club is asking for. But it's kind of weird. You can't, on one side, talk about how you don't want to overpay for players, and then turn around and go and sign Lenny, for that amount of money. It's so contradictory, and it's probably something that Everton were laughing at in terms of, okay, you've told us that you don't want to spend the 60-odd million for Branthwaite. He's got Premier League experience. We've seen him, get in and around the England squad, probably should have been headed to the Euros. You've now gone and paid that similar amount of money for Lenny Yoro, who, yes, also has bags of potential, but not really had that much experience. So, again, that probably puts Everton in a stronger position to hold out for what they want for him, considering what Man United paid for young Lenny Yoro. But, yeah, the important thing for Everton is that the contract is until 2027, so they've got room to breathe there. I wouldn't be surprised if Everton give him a new contract just to reward him for, staying with them for another season, and maybe, add a couple of years, to the end of that deal as well, just to keep maintaining that strength in the bargaining power for Everton. And I think that would be the smart way to do it. I think for both sides it will be a win-win. Give him a pay rise, which he obviously deserves, and then also help the club continue to maintain his value. So that's the big contract for Everton. They have to get him signed on a new deal, but it's not a huge emergency considering his contract goes up to 2027. Let's move on then to the rest of the sales. I think that's it in terms of outgoings. I'm not expecting them to have too many further outgoings. Obviously, these would be big outgoings, and if a Branthwaite does go, that would be a massive outgoing for them. But you would imagine that it would have been at the price that Everton wanted for him, and that would then help them go and replenish the squad. I hinted at the fall planning in terms of like an Onana leaving and bringing in Dia and stuff like that. So there has been some thought in that. Onana leaving, as I said, he was a squad player for Everton. Maybe it didn't quite mesh as well with Sean Dyche. It seemed like it was the Lampard era of a signing where they were trying to play a bit more expansive. So yeah, as I said, 50 million in the bank is better than 80 million on the bench for Everton at the moment. So that's fine. They are desperately looking for wingers. They've been linked to, for example, from Napoli, Jesper Lindstrom. He's obviously not had the greatest time at Napoli. Maybe a loan move with an option to buy is what's being talked about there. They've been linked with Notto from Leeds. Hopefully Jack Harrison can bring him along with him to come to them. They've been linked with Palmeiras player, Richard Rios. Yes, he's been another player that's been linked with them in terms of players that they're looking to bring in. Obviously, he would be sort of a midfield addition for them. In terms of other players that they've been linked with in that midfield area as well is Calvin Phillips from Manchester City. We know Man City have said they're willing to accept half the price that they paid for Calvin Phillips if a team is willing to pay that. But I think Everton, if I'm Everton, I'm looking for a loan with an option to buy. I'm not paying full price for Calvin Phillips because I don't know what player I'm going to get. Unfortunately for him, his career's just gone so far south that you can't pay a permanent deal for him without at least testing out to see what exactly you're going to be getting. There are a couple of players that are on trial from Gambia as well for Everton that I'll mention it. I mean, look, young players, you never know. They could be the next whoever you want, insert name here. But I'll just mention the fact that they're on trial, and we'll see whether or not they're able to stay at Everton. We wish them well during that time period when they are on trial. So, yeah, looking at the squad, looking at how it could end up, if we're saying a Calvert-Lewin goes because of the contract situation, you got Beto. As I said, I think Dia's going to play slightly deeper in that supporting role. Mope comes back. Do you then keep Mope and say he's the backup to Beto, or do you go and look for a player that's similar to Beto and maybe complement, or I guess Mope would complement him they've got different assets that they bring to the game, but maybe more of a deputy to Beto would be better suited to them, so that they're playing the same style of football every single time, irrespective of who's coming into the team. But yeah, for me, I think they do need to go and get another forward. As I said, this is the assumption that Calvert-Lewin is leaving. If they keep both Calvert-Lewin and Beto, I think that's enough this season. Midfield, it's specifically central midfield in that supporting role. They've got Ndia now, they've got Decore there, and then in midfield itself, they've got Garner, who high hopes for him. Hopefully he continues to develop and grow and establish himself as the heartbeat of that midfield. Idrissa Gana Gueye is still there. I think looking long term, I would be hoping that they'll be bringing someone in to eventually take over from him. But again, can they do that in this window? We will see if there's enough money. I think that's one of those situations where if there's enough money at the end, maybe you go and do that. We mentioned, obviously, near the beginning of the podcast, the Tim signing. Obviously, Bonham comes in from Aston Villa. He's another long-term project in that midfield area. So yeah, maybe him and Garner will be the future of Everton's midfield going forward. The wingers I mentioned was the big issue. They've been going after a lot of players. Jack Harrison, as I mentioned, comes back on loan. It could become permanent. They still want another. Maybe they want another two. I wouldn't be surprised, but they definitely want at least one more. Whether it's a Notto, whether it's a Lindstrom, we will see. If it's me, I would also be looking, at like a Jonathan Rowe from Norwich. If it gets to that situation where they're struggling to bring in a Notto, I would be going for a Jonathan Rowe from Norwich. I think if Everton can start getting some of these exciting players from the Championship into the Premier League, kind of like what Crystal Palace were doing for a couple of seasons, I think that would bode Everton really, really well. And I think they can compete for players like him, like a Hayden Hackney, for example, if you can bring him in. Obviously, I mentioned, midfield and whether or not they need further reinforcements there. But how would we bring in a Hayden Hackney? Just bring him in. Even if you send him back on loan for another season at Middlesbrough, I want them to be signing these young players from the Championship or below that are showing promise. And obviously, if you're getting those players, they're not going to be as expensive maybe as some of these other players that you'd be targeting. And if that's the case, if they do progress well, you can then sell them for a lot more money. Again, the Crystal Palace model. Look at the amount of money that they're able to get for an Olise. Look at the money that's being spoken about for an Eberechi Eze. If you can do that, you can help, start to fix some of the financial issues that they're going through at the moment. I'm surprised they weren't in the sweepstakes for Ronnie Edwards. He ended up at Southampton. Again, another player that I would have been targeting if I was Everton. But unfortunately for them, they didn't end up getting someone like him. But yeah, Jonathan Rowe, Hayden Hackney, those are the two players that I would be looking to add in, as well as any other, a Notto or whoever else they end up adding in for those wide players. Defensively, you've got Patterson, you've got a Coleman for the right-hand side. Maybe they would have wanted more depth on that side. They've both suffered from injuries in recent seasons, so whether or not they're going to be able to, stay fit for the whole season, I think that's going to be the big issue for them. Can they keep them fit and firing? And obviously, it was a nice touch for Seamus Coleman to return his previous club in Sligo Rovers and then be able to have that game. I thought that was a really, really nice touch. Again, Everton, a really good club from that perspective. I enjoy that side of things. And Coleman is in the last year of his contract. So again, from a long-term perspective, that's a position they're going to need to strengthen going forward. But again, they could probably get away with it for this season. And maybe they do something they did like the last couple of months with Ashley Young, where they give him another year's contract if they're not in a position to fix that position right now. Centre back, I think they need to start looking at who's going to be the successor to Branthwaite. It seems inevitable that he will be leaving within the next year or 2 or 3. Hopefully, Everton do well enough that he doesn't feel he needs to leave. We've seen it with like a Pickford, for example, where he ends up staying and is an England number 1. That's a part that they could say for Branthwaite. Look, you can still be, a mainstay in the England squad like a Pickford, for example, and stay with us. I think that would be really fantastic. And if Branthwaite stays, it means Everton are doing really well, in my opinion, because he's going to be naturally one of those players that is touted and wanted by a lot of the teams in the Premier League and maybe even abroad as well, if it gets to that situation. So where would that leave Everton for the rest of the season if it ends up being a situation where they do bring in that extra winger that they need? They do bring maybe like a Calvin Phillips on loan. If they've got the money, depending on whether Calvin Phillips, Calvert-Lewin leaves or Beto leaves, bring in a replacement forward for them. I think the squad is good enough to not be involved in the relegation battle. Hopefully the financial issues are in the past in terms of having, points deductions and those sort of things. And as I said, look at their form heading into December before their season kind of got derailed. And I know a lot of people were talking about how the points deduction galvanized Everton and helped them. Their form was actually pretty decent heading into that period before they got the points deduction. So I think people are not giving them enough credit for the form they had before that situation took place. So I think the squad, with those couple of additions, is good enough to then go and stay in the Premier League. No issues in terms of a relegation battle, in my opinion. And then they look to build from there going forward. Fresh start, hopefully new owners by then, new stadium. It could be an optimistic season for Everton. If things go well, it could be a very optimistic season. I'm not too worried about losing an Onana. Yes, he's talented, but it seemed like he wasn't as much a focal point as, of a Sean Dyche team. And if that's the situation, then rather bring the money in. If he was a focal point, obviously you would have wanted to keep him, sort of fight for him in the way that they've been fighting for Branthwaite. But the money was too good for the situation and the status that he has within the squad. Before I sort of give my final thoughts on Everton Football Club, I do want to implore you guys to go and check out Liberty Shield. This podcast is obviously presented by EPLindex.com in association with Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a VPN provider. You can check out their services at libertyshield.com. You guys can save with the coupon code EPL25. That will give you 25% off of your software VPNs. As I was saying, in terms of final thoughts for Everton, key things would have been keeping Mykolenko, which I think they're going to be able to do, keeping a Branthwaite, which it looks like they're going to be able to do, and if they don't keep him, it seems like they're going to get the money they want for him, so that's great. Make sure you've got players lined up to replace him. They can't go into next season without Branthwaite and not have his replacement in the same window. The window he goes, the replacement needs to be coming in. In an ideal situation, the replacement could get bought now so that they can bed into the squad, deputize behind him and grow into that position. But that's just the ideal situation. I don't think it's a practical situation at the moment. They've got other places that they need to invest in. Midfield, as I mentioned, Decore dropping deeper into midfield. Hopefully Dele Alli becomes a mainstay for them as well. That would bolster the midfield. the development of Garner is key. We want to see him continue to grow and become, as I said, James Garner as the mainstay of that midfield would be really good. I would be bringing in a player like a Hayden Hackney rather than a Calvin Phillips personally, just because of the resale value of a Hayden Hackney, if they're able to then develop him and continue to grow him. Wide players, bring in a Notto or whoever else, insert winger, if it's a Lindstrom on loan with a permanent deal later down the line, that's also fine. And then up front, depending on who leaves, Beto or Calvin Phillips, don't lose both, because I think that could be a bit too disruptive. If you have two new strikers coming in, having to get their chemistry with the squad and having to get used to playing at Everton, could end up making things a bit more difficult for them next season. But yeah, I think Sean Dyche is a good manager. He'll have the team set up really well heading into next season. I think their relegation battle issues are in the past. I'm hoping for stability from the perspective of, financial side of things, no points deductions or punishments from that perspective. I'm expecting Everton, and I'm hoping Everton don't get involved in that. Maybe looking to try and improve on that 15th place finish. Again, that's 15th place with the points deductions. Well played to them. If they can start creeping closer to knocking on the door for top half, I think that'll be a good season and a good platform for them to then go on next season and try and improve on that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not too worried about Everton. Maybe it's just me, but I'm quietly confident that they're going to have a good season next season and that they're going to do enough in this transfer window to be able to have that platform to have a good season next season. But obviously, guys, that is going to do it for this episode of A Tad Predictable. Go and check out all of the amazing content on EPL Index website. There's news articles, there's transfer daily podcasts, there's updates on keeping up with every single club in the Premier League that you guys could possibly wish for. And obviously our next show is going to be on Fulham, who were the team of A Tad Predictable last season, so that's going to be fun. But as I said, that's going to do it for this episode. I've been Tadiwa Chankira. You can find me on Twitter at TadPredict. Huge thank you to Obi Semenya. He's at John Empire SA, and Jody, she's at Spursy141 for our guest intros. Go and check out at A Tad Predictable on Twitter. From myself, from the crew, including executive producer Guy Drinkle. Remember, Chisinga Perry, Chinoshura.
Sensational! Shanghai Vincent! Artist John! Yuri Tina, man! You boy that? Yes. There's what to see the Lord. Long is not so good.
Sports Social Podcast Network.